I've come somewhere with lots of trees because what I want to discuss today is, should trees have rights? What's prompted this? Well, obviously that thing with somebody chopping down the tree at Sycamore Gap on Hadrian's Wall. But this is a subject that's quite close to my heart. I mean, you probably know I do all the animal rights thing. And we spend a lot of time doing what we call animal personhood cases, trying to establish that animals should have rights and they are more than mere property. But this is an idea that goes back a very long way. I mean, lots of cultures have always recognised that non-humans have some sort of, innate personhood anyway. I mean, the actual word, animal comes from sort of anima, meaning to possess a soul. But what about trees and other things like rivers and landscapes? There's quite a good book in the 70s that raised all this. It was effectively about trees. But, how daft is it? Well, in the law, of course, people have rights, persons, as we say. But humans are what we call natural persons. They exist, they live, they breathe. But the law, of course, recognises corporations, for instance, they are legal persons. They have legal personhood. I mean, incorporate means to give something a body. So they can sue, they can be sued, they can enter into, contracts. In the US, they can even have freedom of conscience. So businesses can sort of, refuse to adopt policies or to adopt policies based on their sort of moral or sociological beliefs. Obviously, that's the beliefs of the directors, but it's held to be that it's the company. I mean, companies, they can be prosecuted in their own right. So it's perhaps not as daft as it sounds. But what are the sort of major objections? Well, like I say, people say, well, animals aren't people. But we've just established, well, companies, as far as the law is concerned, are people. But how do animals, communicate? How do they give instructions? How do they make decisions? Well, again, the law caters for that. There are lots of people, natural persons, humans, that don't have capacity. That could be because they're children, they could be in a coma, they might have some sort of issues that mean they can't make decisions of their own. And the law copes with that. We have things called next friends. So for instance, if a child brings a court case, the case is brought in the name of the child, but by means of what they call their next friend or their litigation friend. Somebody effectively runs the litigation on their behalf. Or we can have guardians ad litem, as they say, who look after the best interests of the incapacitated person. I mean, you see this when people are in, persistent vegetative states and they want to withdraw treatment. Somebody will go and represent and act on behalf of the person, who is in the coma. And they will act in what they think their best interests are. Same with children. Say a child is left lots of money. There might be trustees to manage that money for them until they come of a certain age. So there are mechanisms in the law to do this. And we have had some success around the world. In Argentina, for instance, a bonobo was granted the equivalent of human rights, Cecilia, to actually move her out of a zoo that wasn't very nice. Similarly, I've been involved, and the word involved is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, with some cases involving elephants in zoos. And we've applied for what's called habeas corpus, a writ of habeas corpus. That just means bring forth the body, show us the body. And originally it was established as a way of making sure there were no arbitrary or unlawful detentions. If one of your friends went missing, you could go to the courts and say, we want a writ of habeas corpus, bring him, let's see that he's not being tortured or he's not being locked away or disposed of somehow. And habeas corpus still exists. I mean, in English law, it's been replaced now by a lot of statutory things, but it still theoretically exists. And we've done this. We've assisted what we call an amicus brief in some American cases where actually, it's a guy called Joe Wills who's really, really brilliant at this, and he does all the hard work. But he likes barristers to sign off on it because he thinks that will impress the American judiciary. I think he might be being very optimistic there, especially when my name's on it. But, this has happened, and we've come very, very close. I mean, the last Supreme Court decision went against us 7-2 in terms of, no, this elephant can't have, human rights. But what was interesting is there were two dissenting judgments saying, actually, yes, that's a really good argument. They should. Because, as Bentham said, the test is not can they think, but can they suffer? So the purpose of this was to get, an elephant out of a particularly nasty zoo. So we are making some progress there. They always say that today's dissents become tomorrow's settled law. And in other jurisdictions, like in India, for instance, they have granted particular rivers rights. Now, in practice, although we sort of sell this as they are being given rights, it's not dissimilar to how we have here, where we have like protected landscapes, like you've got tree protection orders on areas or sites of special scientific interest, which basically means actually yes, this area, this piece of land or this aspect of the landscape, it does have some statutory protections, and we're going to say that there are certain people who can bring cases like judicial review effectively on the landscape's behalf, but the landscape doesn't really have rights, but that's just how we sort of treat it as a legal fiction. But yeah, these things, they are happening, and we've had some success. I mean, with everything, all the pollution in rivers, there have been jurisdictions where they've said actually that the river has a right. Sometimes this is cultural, say in Japan, for instance, where they have the idea of river spirits. It's perhaps not as anomalous to them that actually a river should have rights, but it's happened in a few places around the world and given sort of, these inanimate parts of the landscape legal protections. So yeah, what about the old Paul tree? I mean, effectively, could you be charged with assault for chopping a tree down? Well, maybe one way. But I just thought you might find that vaguely interesting, and if you do, I can go into a lot more detail about this, especially about some of the cases we've been involved in. I mean, I've argued things on behalf of dogs. I mean, a very nice judge who said, well, actually, Mr. Robertshaw, this claim really, it's on behalf of a dog, isn't it? I said, well, actually, technically, it's on behalf of the dog's estate because the poor old dog had died. That judgment began, Mr. Robertshaw seeks to argue a cause of action unknown to English law. But one day we may succeed on that, and then we may have additional protection for all our furry friends and indeed our leafy friends. But there you go. If you did like that, please consider liking and subscribing. I should have asked for that at the beginning because I always forget. But like I say, lots of people watch these videos, but not many of you subscribe. You're under no obligation to, of course, but if you did like that, please feel free to do so.